Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Past. The talk did not die down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton, and indeed all over the Shire, for a year and a day, and was remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favorite character of legend, and lived on long after all the true events were forgotten. But in the meantime, the general opinion in the neighborhood was that Bilbo, who had always been rather cracked, had at last gone quite mad, and had run off into the blue. There he had undoubtedly fallen into a pool or a river and came to tragic, but hardly an untimely end. The blame was mostly laid on Gandalf. If only that dreaded wizard will leave young Frodo alone, perhaps he will settle down and grow some hobbit sense, they said. And to all appearance, the wizard did leave Frodo alone, and he did settle down, but the growth of hobbit sense was not very noticeable. Indeed, he at once began to carry on Bilbo's reputation for oddity. He refused to go into Morin, and the next year he gave a party in honor of Bilbo's 112th birthday, which he called Hundredweight Feast. But that was short of the mark, for 20 guests were invited, and there were several meals at which it snowed food and drink and rained drink, as Hobbit say. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's birthday party year after year until they got used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead. When they asked, "Where is he then?" he shrugged his shoulders. He lived alone, as Bilbo had done, but he had a good many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who has it, who had as children been fond of Bilbo, and often in and out of Bag End. Folko Boffin and Fredgar Bolger were two of these, but his closest friend were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. Frodo went tramping all over the Shire with them, but more often he wandered by himself, and to the amazement of sensible folk, he was sometimes seen far from home, walking in the hills and woods under the starlight. Merry and Pippin suspected that he visited the elves at times, as Bilbo had done. As time went on, people began to notice that Frodo also showed signs of good preservation. Outwardly, he retained the appearance of a robust and energetic hobbit, just out of his twins. Some folk have all the luck, they said, but it was not until Frodo approached the usually more sober age of 50 that they began to think It's queer. Frodo himself, after the first shock, found that being his own master and Mr. Baggins of Bag End was rather pleasant. For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future, but half unknown to himself, the that he had in not gone with Bilbo was steadily growing. He found himself wondering at times, especially in the autumn, about the wild lands and strange visions of mountains that he had never seen came into his dreams. He began to say to himself, "Perhaps I shall cross the river myself one day," to which the other half of his mind always replied, "Not yet." So it went on until his 40s were running out, and his 50th birthday was drawing near. 50 was a number that he felt was somehow significant or ominous. It was at any rate at the age that adventure had suddenly befallen Bilbo. Frodo began to feel restless, and the old path seemed too well trodden. He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond its borders. He took to wandering further, failed and more often by himself, and Merry and his other friends watched him anxiously. Often he was seen walking and talking with the strange wayfarers that began at this time to appear in the Shire. There were rumors of strange things happening in the world outside, and as Gandalf had not at that time appeared or sent any message for several years, Frodo gathered all the news he could. Elves, who seldom walked in the Shire, could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening, passing and not returning, but they were leaving Middle-earth and were no longer concerned with its troubles. There were, however, dwarfs on the road, in unusual numbers. The ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end, at the grey heavens, and dwarfs had always used it on their way to their mines in the Blue Mountains. They were the hobbit's chief source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarfs said little, and hobbits asked no more. But now Frodo often met strange dwarfs of far countries, seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy and of the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like the shadow in the background of their memories, but it was ominous and disquieting. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council, only to reappear in a greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east and south. There were wars and growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains, trolls were abroad, no longer witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all these, but they had no name. Little of all this, of course, reached the ears of ordinary hobbits, but even the feast and most stay at home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the borders saw strange things. The conversation in the Green Dragon at Bywater, one evening in the spring of Frodo's 50th year, showed that even in the comfortable heart of the Shire, rumors had been heard, though most hobbits still laughed at them. Sam Gamgee was sitting in one corner near the fire, and opposite him was Ted Sandyman, the miller's son, and there were various other rustic hobbits listening to their talk. Queer things you do hear these days, to be sure, said Sam. Oh, said Ted, you do if you listen, but I can fear fireside tales and children's stories at home if I want to. No doubt you can, retorted Sam, and I dare say there is more truth in some of them than you reckon. Who invented these stories in any way? Take dragons now. No, thank you, said Ted. I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster, but there is no call to believe in them now. There is only dragon in Bywater, and that's green, he said, getting a general laugh. All right, said Sam, laughing with the rest. But what about these tree men? These giants, as you might call them? They do say that one bigger man, bigger than a tree, was seen up away beyond the North Moors, not long back. Who is they? My cousin Huff, for one. He works for Mr. Buffin at Overhill and goes up to the North Fountain for the hunting. He saw one. Says he did. Perhaps your Hall's always saying he has seen things, and maybe he sees things that ain't there. But this one was as big as the elm tree, and walking 7 yards to a stride. If it was an inch, then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm tree in the North Moors. Then Hall can't have seen one, said Ted. There was some laughing and clapping. The audience seemed to think that Ted had scored a point. All the same, said Sam. You can't deny the others besides. Our Hallfast have been queer folk, crossing the Shire, crossing it, mind you. There are more that are turned back at the borders. The boundaries have never been so busy before. And I have heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say that they are going to the harbours, out away beyond the white towers. Sam waved his arm. Vaguely, neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old towers beyond the western borders of the Shire, but it was an old tradition that away over there stood the grey havens, from which at times the living ships set sail, never to return. They are sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed. Well, that isn't anything new. If you believe the old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you, let them sail. But I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire. Well, I don't know, said Sam thoughtfully. He believed he had once seen an elf in the woods, and still hoped to see more one day. Of all the legends that he had heard in his early years, such fragments of tales and half-remembered stories about the elves as the hobbits knew had always moved him most deeply. There are some, even in these parts, as know the fair world and get news of them, he said. There is Mr. Baggins now, that I work for. He told me that they were sailing, and he knows a bit about elves. And old Mr. Bilbo knew more, meaning as the talk I had with him when I was a little lad. Oh, they are both cracked, said Lad. Lastways, old Bilbo was cracked, and Frodo's cracking, if that where you get your news from. You will never want for moonshine. Well, friends, I am off home. Your good health. He drained his mug and went out noisily. Sam sat silent and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do up in the back end garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow. If the weather cleared, the grass was growing fast, but Sam had more on his mind than gardening. After a while he sighed, and got up and went out. It was early April, and the sky was now clearing after heavy rain. The sun was down, and the cool pale evening was quietly fading into night. He walked home under the early stars, through Hobbiton up the hill, whistling softly and thoughtfully. It was just at this time that Gandalf repaired after his long absence. For 3 years after the party he had been away. Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, and after taking a good luck at him, he went off again. During the next year or two, he had turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk, and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, and seemed chiefly interested in small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then suddenly his visit had ceased. It was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return, and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam was walking home and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with surprise and great delight. They looked hard at one another. "Oh, well, said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." "So do you," Frodo replied, but secretly he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. Next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was in the hearth, but the sun was warm and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh, and the new green of spring was shimmering in the fields and on the tips of the tree fingers. Gandalf was thinking of a spring nearly 80 years before, when Bilbo had run out of bag and without a handkerchief. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been then, and his head and eyebrows were perhaps longer, and his face more lined with care and wisdom. But his eyes were as bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigor and delight. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thoughts. Even in the light of morning, he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought. At last he broke the silence. "Last night you began to tell me some strange things about my ring, Gandalf," he said, "and then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I guess. In what way?" "In many ways," answered the wizard. "It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first, so powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome any one of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him in a region. Long ago many 11 rings were made, magic rings as we call them, and they were of course of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the 11 smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind, dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one the great thing, does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues, until at last every minute is a weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilights under the eye of the dark power that rules the ring. Yes, sooner or later if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later the dark power will devour him." "How terrifying," said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sounds of Sam Gamgee cutting the lawn came in from the garden. "How long have you known this?" asked Frodo at length. How much did Bilbo know? Bilbo knew, Bilbo, know, Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I am sure, said Gandalf. He would certainly never have passed on to you anything that he thought would be a danger, even though I promised to look after you. He thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful at need, and if anything was wrong or queer, it was himself. He said that it was growing on his mind, and he was always worrying about it, but he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame, though he had found out that the thing needed looking after. It did not seem always the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way, and might suddenly slip off a finger where it had been tight. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo, so I have always kept it on its chain. Very wise, said Gandalf, but as for his long life, Bilbo never connected it with the ring at all. He took all the credit for that to himself, and he was very proud of it, though he was getting restless and uneasy, thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control. How long have you known all this? Asked Frodo again. Known, said Gandalf. I have known much that only the wise know, Frodo. But if you mean known about this ring, well, I still don't know. One might say there is a last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in memory. Let me see. It was in the year that the White Council drove the Dark Power from Mirkwood, just before the Battle of Five Armies. The Bilbo found his ring. A shadow fell on my heart then, though I did not know yet what I feared. I wondered often how Gollum came by a great ring, as plainly it was, that at last was clear from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had won it, and I could not believe it. When I at last got the truth out of him, I saw at once that he had been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt, much like Gollum, with his birthday present. The lies were too much unlike for my comfort. Clearly the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on each keeper at once. That was the first real warning I had that all was not well. I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it, and soon got angry. There was little else that I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman the White, but something always held me back. Who is he? asked Frodo. I have never heard of him before. Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are or were no concern of his, yet he is great among the wise. He is the chief of my order and the head of my council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the living rings, great and small, is his province. He has always studied it, seeking the lost secret of their making. But when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of his ring lore told against my fears. So my doubts slept but uneasily. Still I watched and I waited. And all seemed well with Bilbo, and the years passed, yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age. The shadow fell on me again. But I said to myself, after all, he came of a long lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet. Wait. and I waited until that night when he left this house. He said and did things that filled me with a fear that no words of sermon could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. There wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo, anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean. He felt better at once, said Gandalf, but there is only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their effects. And as far as I know, there is no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise I am the only one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises, soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as slow as all tree roads. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most of the wise would believe. I don't think you need worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take a long while for the influence to wear off before it was safe for him to see it again. For instance, otherwise he might live on for years, quite happily just stop as he was when he parted with it, for he gave it up in the end of his own accord. An important point. No, I was not troubled about dear Bilbo any more. Once he has let the thing go. It is for you that I feel responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you, and about all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the Dark Power overcome the Shire, and if all your kind, jolly, stupid Bolgers, hornblowers, buffins, Girdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why should we be? He asked, and why should be such slaves? And why should he want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hitherto, mark you, he has entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. You should be thankful, but your fast has passed. He does not need you. He has many more useful servants, but he won't forget you again. And hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Revenge, said Frodo. Revenge for what? I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself and our ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You don't know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself when I was last here, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. Frodo took it from his breeches pocket, where it was clasped to a chain that hung from his belt. He unfastened it and handed it slowly to the wizard. It felt suddenly very heavy, as if either it or Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf held it up. It looked to be made of pure and solid gold. Can you see any marking on it? He asked. No, said Frodo. There are none. It is quite plain, and it never shows a scratch or a sign of wear. Well, then look. To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back. Wait, he said in a commanding voice. giving Frodo a quick look from under his bristling brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew the curtains. The room became dark and silent, though the clack of Sam's chairs, now nearer to the windows, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood looking at the fire, then he stopped and removed the ring to the heart with the tongs, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped. "It is quite cool," said Gandalf. "Take it." Frodo received it on his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. "Hold it up," said Gandalf, "and look closely." As Frodo did so, he saw fire lines, then the fine pen strokes running along the ring, outside and inside, lines of fire that seemed to form letters of a flowing script. They shone precisely bright and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. "I cannot read the fire letters," said Frodo in a quavering voice. "No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this is the common tongue, is what is said. Close enough. One ring to rule them all. One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is only two lines of a verse long known in Elven lore. 3 rings for the 11 kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stones, 9 for mortal man doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. He paused, and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago, to the great wakening of his power. He greatly desired it, but he must not get it." Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered. "How? How on earth did it come to me?" "Oh," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story. The beginnings lie back. The beginnings lie back in the black years, which only the Lord Masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood, and returned to his ancient fastness in the dark tower of Mordor. That name even your hobbit have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this grateful chance, The enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength and knowledge, to beat down all resistance, break the last defense, and cover all the lands in a second darkness. He lacks the One Ring. The three fairest of all, the elf lords hid from him, and his hand never touched them, or sealed them, sullied them. 7 dwarf kings possessed, but he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men, proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the One, and they became raised shadows under his great shadow, his most terrible servant. Long ago it is many a year since the 9 walked abroad, yet who knows? As the shadow grows once more, they took many walk again, but come. We will not speak of such things, even in the morning of the Shire. So it is now. The 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hiding still, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the One, for he made that ring himself. It is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, and then he will command them all again, wherever they be. Even the 3 and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and they will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed that the one had perished, that the elves had destroyed it, as should have done. But he knows now that it has not perished, that it has been found. So he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it. It is his great hope and our great fear. Why? Why wasn't it destroyed? Cried Frodo. And how did the enemy ever come to lose it? If he was so strong, and it was so precious to him, he clutched the ring in his hand, as if he saw already dark fingers stretching out to seize it. It was taken from him, said Gandalf. The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of Westerners came to their aid. That is a chapter of ancient history, which it might be good to recall, for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valor, and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps I will tell you the tale, all the tale, or you shall hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know how these things came to you, and that will be tale enough, this is all that I will say. I was Galad, 11 king and Elendil of Westerners, who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed, and Isildur, Elendil's son, got the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and his spirit fled, and was hidden for long years, until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost. I fell into the great river, Anduin, and vanished, for Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Golden Fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leaped into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. Gandalf paused, and there in the dark pools amid the golden files, amid the Gandalf was, he said, the rings passed out of knowledge and legend, and even so much of its history is known only to a few, and the council of the wise could discover no more. But at last I can carry on the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river on the edge of Wilderland a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the stores, for they loved the river and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious minded of that family was Scarlet Samuel. He was interested in roads and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds, and he gazed to look up the hilltops, or the leaves on trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were drawn downward. He had a friend called Juggle, of similar sort, sharper eyed, but not so quick and strong. On a time they took a boat and went down to the Gladden Files, where there were great beds in iris and flowering reeds. There Samuel got out and went nosing about the banks, but Dale sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly a great fish took his hook, and before he knew where he was dragged out and down into the water to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought it was something shining in the river bed, and holding his breath, he grabbed at it. Then up he came splattering, with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank, and behold, and he washed the mud away there. In his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Samuel had been watching him from behind the tree, and as Dale gloated over the ring, Samuel came softly up behind. Give us that, Dale, my love, said Samuel, over his friend's shoulder. Why? Said Dale. Because it's my birthday, my love, and I want it, said Samuel. I don't care, said Dale. I have given you a present already, more than I could afford. I found this, and I am going to keep it. Oh, you are indeed, my love, said Samuel, and he caught Dale by the throat and struggled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what had become of Dale. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Samuel returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him. When he was wearing the rings, he was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets, and he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious uses. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared, for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned, when visible, by all his relations. They kicked him, and He bit their feet. He took to the thieving, and going about muttering to himself, and gargling in his throat. So they called him Gollum, and cursed him, and told him to go far away, and his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family, and turned him out of her hall. He wondered his loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness, the hardness of the world, and he journeyed up the river till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was breathing over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazed light from the water pained his weak eyes. He wondered at it, for he had